Hi, I'm John F. Allen.
And I'm R.J. Sullivan.
And we're the Two Towers.
So, episode 5 is All the World is Birthday Cake. Now, who doesn't like birthday cake? I like birthday cake. As a matter of fact, I like birthday cake shakes from Steak and Shake. Yes, I do. I even like birthday cake flavored vodka. Woo! Imagine that. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
This particular episode should be noted. It is directed by Robert Duncan McNeill. Now, if you're not familiar with Robert Duncan McNeill's name, you maybe know a character that he portrayed on Star Trek Voyager as Lieutenant Tom Paris, who was at the helm of the Starship Voyager for many years.
Oh, I forgot. I totally missed that. Go on.
Yeah. So, again, another grab from the Star Trek mythos and Star Trek personnel and people who have either written, directed, or starred in shows or movies or such tied to Star Trek. Okay, so this particular episode, when a semi-primitive society finally calls out in space by radio, you can imagine that this might be us in 100 years or so. The Orville
could be us tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. yes, definitely. SpaceX. Anyway, the Orville picks up the signal first and rushes there. Ed's Captain Mercer's party is warmly welcomed as both sides want to discover the other. Suddenly, the state dinner turns into an outraged break-off as soon as Bortus and Kelly mention having their birthday. Both are arrested as Gileacs and sent to a concentration camp. The rest of the party sent back to the ship, never to seek contact again. Turns out, the society has an astrological prejudice causing births to be artificially shifted to avoid ill-boding months destining for a chained life. I'm reading this from somewhere it's not quite making any sense. So we're basically, you celebrate your birthday, you get sent to a concentration camp. That's what it all boils down to.
If you were born under a bad sign, you're just considered bad.
Right. Yeah.
That's the point. Yeah.
This episode was tricky for me. It was one that I enjoyed watching to a certain extent, but I was like, these people are completely nuts. Now, granted, it's a different society. It was almost like you're prepared to travel space and make contact with other species, but you hold on to this fallacy of birth time. I mean, to me, it was like, okay, you're ready, but you're not ready. It's almost like teaching a 13-year-old to drive, and they learn how to drive, but are they really responsible enough to drive, even though they technically know how? That's how I saw it. What about you, RJ?
Yeah, well, here again, the spoof and the comedy clash with the drama. And to me, this one's not a successful one. The drama is played out 100% straight. The cruelty is cruel. And when they're taken away to their concentration camps, we know what we're evoking here. They don't back off from that, and you get the idea that these have been going on for a very long time. But the concept is so preposterous. It's what's the word? Straw man concept. It takes it very hard to take seriously to some extent. I mean, we know that people are cruel to other people for ridiculous reasons, but I think where this episode tips to not only being poor science fiction, but I think it betrays its own the Orville tries to be an homage to Star Trek and what Star Trek means. And I think when we get to the end of this episode, it kind of betrays that. There are many episodes where Captain Mercer says to people, when in doubt, I try to present the truth. I try to be as open as possible. But rather than resolving this by telling them your foolish prejudices are having these problems, and here is the wisdom and the knowledge that we have learned being advanced from you, finding some way to resolve it with logic and reason. They make the choice instead to use their prejudice against them and trick them by creating an astrological deception, by making it look like something's going on in the sky that wasn't actually going on, so that they had to change their mind. In other words, they use their super goodness gracious
advanced technology.
They use their superstitious nature against them. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Rather than taking steps so that they would become more enlightened, they actually validate their superstitious nature and make them think, aha, well, it's not that we were wrong with what we did before, but now the stars are telling us something different, so we should let them out of prison. And that was very disappointing to me, because I can't think of anything that correlates with that in the Star Trek vein of any generation, where we're going to just leave these folks in their ignorant state, use their ignorance against them in order to create a temporary resolution, which is going to be figured out by this civilization eventually. But I had no sense that they were going to move forward, that they were going to learn from it, and I found that disappointing, because I thought that was kind of it was I don't know,
contrived.
Again, it's where the comedy and the drama kind of clash, and I think it clashed in the wrong way here.
Well, let me say that I agree with you fundamentally. I think that it was a contrived situation. It was something that I think, when it comes to this particular episode, they thought of a resolution that they could make to this story that could, so the story could be told in one episode. And I think that they use this device for that purpose without actually thinking about how great of a storyline they could have had for future episodes if they revisited it. In my opinion, that's my opinion.
And they still could. Yeah, they
still could. But I also think that, they kind of wrote themselves in a corner. There's no way that society that even if it's, and this is where the whole 13-year-old, that knows how to drive, are they responsible enough, comes into play. Yeah. There's no way a society that has long been governed by astrological phenomena in how they perceive the good or bad in a person is going to change just because they are able to engage in space travel. It's like Earth in reality. We have people who have traveled beyond the atmosphere and have seen this planet from its outer reaches in space. And then we still have people on this planet who think the Earth is flat. Now, this is a theory that people have had for years, that, still permeates today among some people. The point that I'm making is that there was no simple fix, even if they had, in my opinion, even if they had said, well, you know what, actually, that's not true. These guys on this planet would have been like, yeah, no, it is true, because that's what we believe, and that's what we've always believed. So there was no simple fix to this, which is why I feel like they wrote themselves into a corner, and they didn't utilize this storyline as effectively as they could have been, and also made this something that they revisited upon consecutive subsequent episodes. That's just my opinion.
There you go.
All right, we ready to move on to episode 6?
Yes.
All right, episode 6. Woo! You're getting through these episodes, RJ, I tell you. So, this episode is one that I particularly liked. I think it's some more character development. It actually leads into something else in a later episode that we'll discuss. But Claire's personal life takes an unexpected turn, and that's because she and Isaac begin dating, which is kind of weird, but it's also kind of sweet at the same time. So you've got a woman with 2 kids, single mother. She's a professional person. She's a doctor. And despite the fact that this is 400 years in the future and set on the set of a starship. So you've got these strong feminine dynamics here. And you've also got her being single and lonely. She grows attracted to a being who's sentient, but does not have any true emotions, grasp of emotions. Very similar to Data in that respect from the Next Generation, but even further, does not have the physical prosthetics to even look human or even really function as a human from a romantic standpoint, which is another layer to this episode. Very interesting. What do you think?
Oh, I really liked it. Sometimes the Orville goes for sentiment, and it goes for the feel good type situation. And this one worked for me. I have a fondness for preposterous situations that should not play out well, and then they somehow do. And this one really fits into that so well. The idea that she's going to date the robot and somehow they're going to make that work, and what would that look like if you actually tried to make it work? I thought that again, you're rooting for them. You go from kind of disbelief to, hey, that actually makes a certain amount of sense. Oddly enough, I just, within a couple of days of watching this episode, because I am watching The Next Generation at the same time, I just happened to see the one where Data dates a yeoman for an episode, and the contrasts of those two, which was kind of fun to watch, how they tackled the same thing 30, 40 years ago and how they tackle it today. There's an interesting use of the holodeck in this that kind of works into the story very well. Again, another interesting use of the holodeck. I won't say they've never done it on Star Trek before, but it's not been used quite this way before. Mm-hmm. And it's so sweet. The way it finishes up, it was very sweet. And I was taken with it. And then of course it sets up things for future episodes. Because you are at this point, in Isaac's corner and in Dr. Finn's corner, and you're like, okay, well, let's let's ride this forward and see where it goes. And then, then terrible things happen in future episodes. We're going to get there very shortly. So, yeah, it worked for me quite well.
Yes, I concur. I was rooting for this couple, even as weird and different as they were. It was an interesting dynamic, and I think that it also fleshed out both characters in a lot of ways that endeared them to me even more than they were previously. So, yeah. Next episode is episode 7, called Deflectors. Now, this particular episode is very interesting in that it does a lot. It says a lot with regards to our current society, and not recent past too. So we have evolved a lot since, let's say, the 50s, 40s or 50s, and to some extent the early 60s. But this particular storyline, Bortus is surprisingly cold to fellow Mocklin, who is a star engineer who visits the Orville to install a deflectors for improvement to their ship. The engineer's stay goes awry when possibly murdered, and the crew finds out it all has to do with a Mocklin taboo that he broke with Bortus. So fearsome, he prefers to disappear, then tries tires of hiding the truth despite the consequences. And I think this is a very interesting play on how gay people or transgender people are treated or viewed by the general society in our reality. So much so that they would go to great lengths to hide who they are from society in order to be accepted. And this was most prevalent in prior to the past, I'd say 2 decades, as our society is growing more accepting in a lot of ways, and people are a lot more free with who they are now as they were, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, when, you pretty much put on a beard and that was who you were. You did not let anyone know what was going on, because you would be blacklisted, shunned, ostracized, all of that. So I think this is a very interesting episode. And again, the Orville does a good job in presenting material that mirrors what is going on in reality. Now, what's interesting about this episode, a little trivia before we get to RJ's comments, is that it was directed and written by Seth MacFarlane. So all that being said, for all the things that people have a problem with Seth MacFarlane about or whatnot, I think in this particular episode, he does try to make a good point with the story. What do you think, RJ?
Well, one of the things I was reflecting on, so this engineer has a secret. He has a secret attraction to the opposite sex, which is forbidden on their planet. And when you think about it, it's not only is that something that would be forbidden, it would be something that there would be a rare opportunity for on their planet, since as we are told, females have their gender changed as infants. So he would, until they became part of a starfaring society, opportunities to date women would have been virtually non-existent. And so what I found interesting about this is basically, here's a guy who probably didn't even know that he had this attraction to the opposite sex, except for the fact that he's out in the starships surrounded by women. And you know, is it, you know, it's an open question. Is this a kink? Is this something that he would have been able to pursue had their society went along more normal lines? You know, at this point I was noticing that Clyden was making a series of bad decisions, one after the other, because it's Clyden that gets everybody in trouble and exposes everything and creates all kinds of trouble for everyone. But yeah, this is another one where the answers are not easy, the solutions are not easy, and everything's kind of left as an open question to you know, what happens when a closed society gets exposed to other societies and leaves them to kind of have to question what they consider normal, and what might that look like when someone is condemned for what we would consider being too open or trying to be themselves.
And what's also interesting about this whole situation is that the dynamics, as it contrasts with real life situations. So anyway, think about it like this: the Moclan society, because you have all males who reproduce with other males, if you like pair that up or parallel that to human society as it is in reality, they're gay. So
yeah,
then you have this person in this episode who is, compared to our society, straight, but they are ostracized for being straight. So it flips the roles. So it almost it's like, well, it's a show that says, what if instead of being persecuted because you're gay, you're persecuted for being heterosexual? How would that play out? How would that feel? And I think that that's eye-opening for a lot of people who view the episode. Now, I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was something that was very well produced and something that needed to be done. I think that it did well in looking at things from a different perspective.
Well, and it's also building the bigger world of where Clyden and Bortus come from. You know, we learn things about their culture as it comes as we go through episode after episode, and there's a lot of really unpleasant things going on there, and yet they're part of the Union, and we accept them as allies, even though there are a lot of things about their culture that we would consider backwards, superstitious, pick your word. And at the same time, they're also reflecting where we are in the 21st century here on Earth. So it's you know, again, it's surprising depth for a show that considers itself spoof comedy.
Absolutely. Are you ready to move on to the next episode?
I am.
All right. So, and we'll tackle this as talking about this. This is a two-parter. So this is episodes 8 and 9, which are titled Identity Part 1 and 2. So we'll talk about these as a group as opposed to separate episodes. Makes it easier, I think. Just so you would know, the Orville is puzzled when non-biological organism Isaac ceases to function. The doctor and her sons are basically in a panic as they have grown quite fond of Isaac. The Admiral is contacted with the Union, and he, with great trepidation, allows the Orville to travel to Isaac's home planet in hopes of repairing him, only to discover that he has completed his mission. So basically, his race, the Kalons, they seek knowledge, much like the Borg in a way. They seek knowledge, and so his mission was to live amongst humans and serve on this starship to the point where he can learn about how they can conquer them. And this is what they discovered, that the Kalons really just, they want to eradicate humans. That's their end goal, and different from the Borg, who want to assimilate the species that they encounter. They basically turn into murder robots.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I think these two episodes were very, very interesting. I think that they were kind of two of the most entertaining or most action. They had a lot to lose. There was a lot of jeopardy that in these episodes. I really enjoyed it. It was like watching an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where you were like kind of almost on the edge of your seat, like with what was going on and how this would play out, and the stakes were high, and you had the whole Union being involved, and it was just very very entertaining for me in that way. What about you, RJ?
Well, yeah, it felt like it reminded me of Next Gen's Best of Both Worlds. This was the epic. Really, this is where the season peaks.
Mm-hmm.
If you're charting it on Rising Action, this is where we hit the top, because they spare no expense in the visual effects. They spare no expense in giving you that galactic epic sweep. The battles are huge battles. The fighting is nothing in this is small. And the stakes are incredibly high. The emotional stakes are also incredibly high, because this would not have worked if we hadn't have built up Isaac's character over several episodes. If you hadn't have, if the viewer hadn't had been brought to the idea that there might be something more to Isaac, and you're rooting for him to kind of find his inner humanity, as it were, this would not have worked nearly as well. There is also the fact of, when you look back on the security officer who was removed from the show, there is an uncertainty as to whether or not Isaac is going to survive past this two-parter, because you're left with two things. Number one, he's a robot and he's sided with his people initially, and we also know that they will write characters out to their convenience at this point. So there's no guarantee that Isaac is going to make it through the entire two parts. There was always the possibility that, hey, we've played out this artificial intelligence storyline. We don't need to do anything more with it. But I like the fact that everyone else has given up on Isaac, but the small child, and I don't have the note in front of me, but it's the doctor's child, who's the only one there who feels like Isaac can come back, that he will come back, that he'll do the right thing ultimately. And most of the characters don't think he will, and that left some doubt, but you also left that grain of hope that it's the faith of a child that matters in these situations. And ultimately, he does come around, and he does continue on into further episodes, which was delightful, but it was also given the gravitas it needed up until the point where things turn around. So this was great television. This was a wonderful pair of episodes that go together very well and have the epic scope that they can reach for when they want to.
I concur. And I think that the way that the relationship between Isaac and Dr. Claire was developed, gave you that, I guess you were invested, and so it suspended disbelief there. It did something to you that caused you to say, wow, I would have this void emotionally with regards to the show if Isaac didn't return, or if something happened. And that's a testament to not only the writing but the acting. I mean, everyone on this show does a really good job of portraying their characters, and you believe. And I just want to give them credit where credit's due. I think they do a tremendous job.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by OG Nerds, a new social media community dedicated to nerds of a certain age, 40 and over, although all are welcome. Members are encouraged to share articles and links on their favorite nerdy topics such as animation, anime, art, books, writing, comics, manga, movies, music, sports, tech, science, TV, video games, RPGs, and more. Be sure to visit them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.